Hello, and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. I'm your host, Jeff Ma. I'm a director at Softway, an agency based out of Houston, Texas, that specializes in digital transformation, culture, and branding. Each episode, we dive into one element of business or strategy and test our theory of love against it. And today, we're talking about feedback, an 8-letter word that can sometimes feel like a 4-letter word. And it's something that everybody needs, but not everybody wants to hear all the time. So this is a hot topic at Softway, and I wanted to assemble a special group to talk about it with me today. And so with me, I have Frank. Frank, hello.
Hey, Jeff.
Usual suspect. And we also have the one and only Maggie, our executive producer is what we like to call her. And we've invited her back to talk. Maggie, hello.
Hello, glad to be back.
And we have a first-time guest, someone very special to all of us, Miss Lydia. Hello, Lydia.
Hey, y'all.
And Maggie and Lydia are project managers here at Softway, and two of the best. And we wanted to incorporate this project management perspective here today, and remove the bosses, if you will. We've gotten rid of Mo and Chris, and we want to talk about them behind their back. So that's really what this episode's going to be about. I'm kidding. Before we begin, I want to do some icebreakers as usual. And so, Frank, let's start with you. I'm pulling up the icebreakers. This is great.
Pass.
Describe the worst haircut you've ever had.
The worst haircut I've ever had was when I was 12 years old and Astroworld was still a thing here in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
My dad said that he would buy me a season pass to Astroworld. He would get me a season pass to Astroworld if he could shave my head. Like, he's like, I will buy you a season pass if you have a shaved head. You have to shave your head in order to get it. And I said, sounds like a fair deal. And so he shaved my head in the backyard. And I had, for that summer, the worst possible haircut because it was splotchy and it like wasn't pro at all. But I was at Astroworld a lot that summer, so that was fantastic.
Nice.
Why did he want it? Yeah.
I have absolutely no idea. I think that he just wanted to dare me to do something wild just to see if I would do it. And I ended up doing it, but it was a terrible haircut.
Interesting parenting strategy, but you turned out great. So I guess it worked.
Thanks, Jeff. Love you so much.
You're welcome. Maggie, on to you. Describe your most questionable fashion choice ever.
Well, so I was born in the mid 90s. So I grew up in the early 2000s, like middle school aged. And so that was a rough time. Your awkward phase in the early 2000s, like coming together at the same time. So I remember specifically in middle school, Crocs were popular and also gauchos were popular. If you don't know what gauchos are, they're basically flowy capri pants.
They're wonderful.
And I remember picking this outfit out and thinking, dang, this is fire. It was gaucho pants, black gaucho pants with lime green Crocs. And then on top, it was a white camisole, of course, with a camo shrug. If you don't know what a shrug is, it's like a sweater that's cut off like mid drift, I guess. And you're supposed to wear a shirt under it, obviously, because it's just a little shrug. And I remember walking onto the bus in the morning and being like, everybody's looking at me because I look so cool right now. And now I wish my friends had said something.
You wish you'd gotten that feedback. Then.
I
Jeff,
do.
good job.
I really
Topical. Well, I learned a lot in that icebreaker about fashion and, a new definition for shrug for sure. Okay, cool.
This was probably like 2006, so prime fashion year.
Oh yeah, no, very good.
Well, Lydia, your question is very different.
Good one.
These are all feedback themed, just in case you hadn't noticed. If someone had to tell you that you have a booger hanging out of your nose, who in your life would you want to deliver that news? Who would you trust with that feedback?
I'm going to be really honest. I don't care who it is, whoever's the closest in proximity, right? Like if I have something hanging out of my face, I hope the first person to see it's going to tell me.
It's a true friend.
Well, that's perfect because you do actually have a book. No, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for
Thank you, guys.
feedback, Jeff.
You're welcome. So I'm really excited again to be joined by Maggie and Lydia because, mostly, first of all, because they're some of my favorite humans in the world, and I mean that, but also because they're excellent project managers. And to me, project managers are just constantly surrounded by feedback, whether it's feedback that, you have to give to team members or feedback that you're getting from others like clients and stakeholders. I feel like, especially at Softway, our project managers are like the best people to talk to if you're trying to unpack feedback. And so, I really wanted this episode to be really centric around what your guys' perspective and kind of helping us unpack what love's got to do with any of this, right? So to kick us off, Lydia, you're our guest. I want to just start with some stories. I think feedback to me always has stories associated with it. Feedback is just a thing. Lydia, do you have, just to kick us off, any stories around when you think of feedback, what is a story that stands out to you?
Yeah, actually, Jeff, I think the most memorable story around feedback for me and the one that I took the most learnings away from was with you specifically.
Great.
So as y'all know, when I started at Softway, I did not have a background in project management. It was new to me. And when I started, you guys, Frank was with you. You guys were off traveling the world, facilitating the incredible Seneca experience to so many people. And the rest of us were back home cheering you on from afar. Still working on projects as you guys were also doing while traveling. But for whatever reason, you seemed to trust me. And I felt like at the time that I did not have the tools that I needed to be successful. And I had this thing building up inside of me of, I don't know what I'm doing. The person that's supposed to be training and teaching me is traveling around the globe. And even if I reach out to him, he's sound asleep or getting ready to facilitate, a Seneca experience. And so I did what I think can be easier to do, which is I sucked it up for a while. And I was like, I'll be fine. But in reality, what was happening is internally, I was becoming increasingly frustrated. And there were likely some bad behaviors that came from that. And I remember just getting to a point, I was actually going on vacation. I had a few days that I had planned to take off. And right before that, I was like, I'm going to wait until the day before I leave for vacation so that I can give Jeff this feedback. I'm going to send him an email. And if there's some kind of response, I'll be on vacation. So I then get a few days before I have to respond to however he reacts. Because I realized so much of the culture of feedback at Softway has helped me realize that I have an expectation of a negative response or punishment. And Softway team members continue to prove to me that's not how, it goes. But that was something from previous experiences I expected. So I wrote this email to Jeff. I think I rewrote it probably 4 or 5 times. And I've just blacked it out because I was so worried about it. And sent an email and was like, I don't feel like I have what I need. I think I'm failing miserable. And I don't even remember your response. But from that, we have a great relationship now where we're able to be very open and honest, which has been good. And it kind of threw me for a loop because your response was so welcoming of my feedback, despite how in my first attempt, I was learning how to give it. It was a huge shock to me, but it almost allowed me to then be able to receive feedback from others and continue to give it because of the way that you responded to giving you feedback at the beginning of our relationship. So, yeah.
I'd actually never heard that story in that form or entirety before. I first of all like to apologize. I still feel bad, but also I didn't realize just how much pressure you'd packed up into that moment. On my end, I just received some really good feedback, and I was like, "Oh, this is thank you for letting me know. And
Yeah. And I think the reality of it is what I realized once I delivered the feedback is that the pressure that I was feeling was more about how you were going to react. What I needed from you wasn't that monumental. There wasn't a huge miss. It was that I had fear around how you were going to respond. And that's what was causing me stress. So
thank you for sharing that.
sure.
I'm going to move on to Frank. Let's do Frank.
Sure.
What story you got?
So it was during our travels around the world, and at one point in time we were in Singapore, and we were actually, it was maybe like 30 minutes, 20 minutes before we were going to go and start one of these Seneca experiences, and we were sitting in a room having a conversation about making choices that we were like, up until the very last few minutes before this event, we're sitting there going, what are we going to do about this one particular situation? And I noticed that Muhammad, as we were talking in the conversation, he started to shut down a little bit, and he became like very closed and very just like, yeah, whatever. No, like very quick to respond in very like one word, one syllable responses. And and you can feel the temperature of a room change when someone shuts down. And most of the time, we're not brave enough to stand up and say, hey, can we address this? Can we move through this? When someone's shutting down, we kind of shove them to the side, ignore it, and move forward, and feel that sense of awkwardness, that sense of uncomfortability that happens as a result of it. And I struggle with giving, feedback in the moment or asking, for critical feedback. And so I felt that in this moment, at this time, I had to be the one to push and to give, the fear of confrontation took control. And I felt like I was going to throw up. I was like, I'm going to die. This is the worst thing that's ever going to happen. But I was sitting there, and I remember myself with my laptop open, kind of trying to hide in my laptop as I saw him shut down, as I saw the room kind of grow quiet, and no one's coming to a discussion, no one's coming to a consensus. And I knew that I had to close my laptop and actually speak up and give that feedback. Muhammad, I noticed that you just shut down. I think we need to talk about this. What's going on? Let's discuss it, and let's move past it. And I was shaking while I was giving this, and I was telling him, hey, we can't shut down in this moment. We have to move forward. We have to make a decision. And what's interesting is pushing past that space, it creates this sense of relief for everyone in the space, not just yourself. If it's just between two people, like Lydia mentioned, you build up this mental image of something going disastrously wrong. But then when you are able to get past that, whatever that block is, and give the feedback that's necessary, it's almost euphoric, because when the person receives the feedback in a way, you've released it and said, like, here it is. This is what I got for you. And it's up to them to receive it and engage with it. And in that moment, Muhammad appreciated the fact that someone stood up and said, hey, this isn't right. The way we're having this discussion isn't right. We need to move forward. So I think for me, that was one of the biggest revelations for practicing giving people feedback and critical feedback in the moment, instead of waiting for days, weeks, or months to be able to deliver something to someone.
Nice. Thank you. Maggie, what story you got?
The first one that comes to mind was actually about Chris, and he's not here, so we can talk about it.
Yes.
But as a project manager, which I'm sure Lydia can empathize with this, but specifically with your project leads, they're very stretched thin for the most part. They're usually on multiple projects, and you're having to vie for time, vie for attention, more often than not with specific people on your team. That's just a part of the game and a part of the job, which is normal. And so Chris was a project lead on a project I was on. It was an internal project. And I was having a tough time because the team was going through a really big transition period. I felt really lost, and I was relatively new to the team. I wasn't the project manager from the beginning of the project. I was put in there. And so I kept trying to schedule a one-on-one with Chris, and he kept accepting. And then I think maybe 2 times he either can't, well, 2 or 3 times he either canceled or just didn't show up to a one-on-one. And I was so upset, but mostly because, like I said, I would have understood the like, hey, I need to move it. Something came up. It was the accepting the meeting, and I'm waiting in this meeting room for like 30 minutes waiting for him to show up.
Ooh, Chris.
And I've like texted him a couple times and he hadn't responded. And so I was upset. And I remember going to, I'm pretty sure I went to Ashley, who's a senior project manager at the time. And she's a mentor to me. And so I went to her and I was just really upset. I was like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, you need to tell him. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that. And she's like, no, you need to set up a meeting with him, tell him it's really important, and tell him you have feedback for him, and he'll come. And I was like, oh, okay. And I mean, like Frank and Lydia have said, it's really nerve-wracking. And mostly for me, it was nerve-wracking because it feels super vulnerable to be like, hey, sitting in that meeting room waiting for you hurt my feelings. Like that feels like, I don't know, to me, that's very vulnerable. And especially like as a woman, I'm like, I don't want to get all like touchy-feely on this conversation because of the stereotypes that women have. And so I was really cautious. And so I went in, he came to the meeting, and I just sat down and I hemmed and hawed for a really long time. And I was like, so set this meeting up, I think I did small talk first, like, how's your week been? All that stuff. And then finally I just cut to the chase and said, like when I understand that you're busy. I know you're pulled in a lot of different directions. But when you don't let me know that you can't make it to a meeting and I think you're coming and you don't show up, it makes me feel like I'm not worth your time. And I didn't even know I felt that way until I said it out loud. And I was like, wow, okay, that's the root of the problem. He accepted it very well, explained like kind of where he was coming from too. I was able to see his perspective and empathize with some of the reasons behind the miscommunications and whatever, and we had a good conversation. But I think right after that, he was going out of town for a client meeting or conference or something. He was gone for a week and a half or something like that. And in the first day he left, he had flowers sent to the office for me and said, I think I still have the card, but the card said something like, of course you're worth my time. And that just like, first of all, he heard what I said and remembered what I said. And second of all, like made an effort to show me that he cared and that he heard my feedback and wanted to do something about it. So it ended up being a really good experience, but I was definitely nervous.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's solid.
So there's a clear theme here, and I want to break that open a little bit because feedback is this, for me personally, not personally, sorry, before I get into that, there's two sides of feedback, right? There's giving feedback, there's receiving feedback. And it's interesting hearing your story. All three of your stories centered around having to give crucial feedback. And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that is like the fear and the center of anxiety and kind of like the struggle. And it's funny because I personally struggle way more with receiving feedback. If someone says, I have feedback for you, I'm just like, I'm tense. And like, I think Lydia's done this to me before. She'll be like, oh, I set up a meeting tomorrow to give you some feedback. I'm not sleeping that night. Like it doesn't matter what it ends up just being like, oh, it's like a tiny little thing and it's not even negative. But I would message her like late night. I'd be like, Lydia, can we just talk right now? Because whatever this is, it's growing in my mind. And whatever it is, I'm making a lot of assumptions already. And I'm really introspecting hard on myself on what I did wrong to you over so I get really in my head about feedback. But so I want to break apart these two halves, right? When it comes to feedback, I want to start with what you guys are centered on. What makes it so hard, like tangibly, to give others feedback? You guys touched on it in all your stories. Frank, can you kick us off? Like, what's so difficult? What's the hardest part about giving feedback?
I mean, I'll say, Jeff, I recognize that usually when Muhammad says like, hey, Frank, I've got some feedback for you, I'm like, well, I'm going to update my resume. I'm going to make sure that LinkedIn is like leaned in. I'm like, I'm gone. I'm out. Can you just tell me what it is right now? But when it comes to why it's things that are holding us back from giving feedback, a lot of it comes from fear. I mean, that to me is really the reality. The fear of the response from the other individual. When you're calling into question the capability of the person, if they've let you down or done something in some way, like all of those things get inside of our heads, right? So you can also think about the people that you gave feedback to, including myself, were your direct report, like people that your bosses, right? Well, for me, it was our CEO. For Lydia, it was your direct report. For Maggie, it was VP. Like, we're giving feedback upwards to people in our organization. And what happens if that limits our career capacity in some way, right? So I think that ultimately, though, that fear of the fear of giving people feedback comes from not having a relationship, not having the trust with the other person, and then there's this lack of courage as a result of it. All of those elements kind of fold in to making it incredibly challenging to actually give someone feedback.
Lydia, anything you'd add to that from your experience?
Yeah, I think sometimes for me, like you mentioned, as a project manager, it can be difficult seeing someone that may be in a different level of the organization, right? That for so much of my life, I've been taught or seen that certain people in a certain tier, they may communicate with someone else. But for me, like that example that I gave, Jeff, of going to you and saying, hey, you're my boss in this situation, but you're not doing this right. I think that can be more challenging. But taking that first step, again, I know we're talking about the giving it, but it opens a door for being able to receive it, because as a leader, you modeled that for me. So you were able to show me that, hey, when you step into this and do this, that it's a lot easier. But just removing that mindset that we're all just people and we're all for one another. And so that means that I can be open and honest with you in conversation, because you are just another person who's imperfect, just like I am.
Sure. And I can echo that. I'm sorry, Maggie. I can echo that, Lydia. Just like, I feel like although you and I aren't crossing paths every day in the current roles and work we're doing, I definitely feel that that story you shared from just a simple email way back has grown immensely just through additional. I mean, we've given each other a lot of feedback along the way, and it's just this relationship that I really, really value. And I think it starts from our kind of mutual understanding that feedback will be present in every space that we share. And I really echo that. I'm sorry, Maggie, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
That's okay. I was just something that came to mind about giving feedback is, Lydia, I don't know if you experience this as a project manager, but a lot of times a stakeholder or a client will give feedback to you, the project manager, for someone else on the team. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be really tricky navigating, okay, how do I package this feedback to then pass along? And now it's secondhand. And, within Softway's walls, we really try to avoid that, but you can't always control what a client is comfortable with or not comfortable with. And so it's always a kind of a dance of like, okay, do you need to be like direct and just like tell them exactly what the client said, or should you package it in a certain way that has them receive it a little bit better? You really have to think about it. You can't just like offhandedly send them a chat, because you need to think about who's receiving it and how they're going to take it and how they're going to perceive it, because people receive feedback differently. And so that is always tricky to me, having to do the middleman feedback stuff.
Mm-hmm. And to flip it over to receiving feedback, I think, because that's where my mind is always, when you say feedback, I'm assuming I'm getting it. And I think that there's also a fear on that side as well. Like, I think there's a fear, and I think because both of these have this stigma of fear of giving and receiving, it's just this process that's tainted in, it just feel like, even in our stories, these were like, some of them were like one-on-ones and sit downs, and like, you got to look at each other and say right to your face. And it's just, it can be built up in concept as a very stressful confrontation. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I'd like to kind of move our conversation to now is, how do we change that? How do we make it so that it's not so much this construct of stress and fear? Frank, any ideas on where we start?
Well, I mean, first of all, the way we're describing feedback is an event. Like, it's dropped on a calendar. It's something important that has to be done. And when you make it an event, you're making it something that comes with a high level of stress and anxiety and baggage. And so what is needed in order to remove the event nature of feedback is building a culture of feedback inside of an organization. That's ultimately what will end up making it stick, is having an opportunity for people like Jeff, you and I, for example. We have a very unique way of giving each other feedback.
Some would say that we give each other too much feedback.
It is real time every minute. But what's crazy about it is that we are brutally honest with each other. You will immediately call me out, sometimes in front of other people, which is great because I actually really enjoy that, because it holds me accountable. And at the same time, I'm willing to give you that same amount of feedback. And we, as a personal relationship, have a culture of feedback personally, right? But then how do you expand that to an organization where all of us can kind of work within this culture of feedback? So it doesn't feel like an event. It feels like part of the journey that you have with another person, part of the relationship that you have with another person, expected as part of the way you work with each other. That's really how to fix this problem of making feedback such a horrible thing. And also, when we say the word feedback, we almost automatically tune to it being negative. We don't even consider the opposite is true, that the feedback could be positive, usually because we don't phrase feedback in a positive sense as being feedback. But we're afraid of it. It's like built into our DNA to be fearful of it. But if you can build a culture of feedback, then there's no fear. It's just par for the course.
Maggie or Lydia, do you guys agree? Do you guys have, how does that look like in your teams or in your interactions? We'll go with Lydia. Okay, Maggie, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lydia. I was going to say, Lydia, you should go.
All you, girl. Producer, take it away.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So, yes, I agree with that. I think coming from a place that previous jobs I've had didn't have cultures of feedback. So coming here first felt very, very weird at first. And I will never forget the first time someone gave me feedback, and it wasn't even a big deal. It was something super small. And I was like, oh, this means I'm doing a terrible job. This means that everybody's talking about me behind my back. And it's this like internal monologue that just starts going on. But as you kind of get used to, like what Frank said, a culture of feedback, it becomes something that you almost crave, and something that you realize if someone's giving you feedback, it means they actually are noticing you enough to provide that feedback. In a way, it's a compliment because if someone didn't care about how well you're doing or just didn't even notice you, they wouldn't be able to give you any kind of feedback. And so that's kind of how I try to look at it. But also, if you are in a culture that doesn't have a culture of feedback, if you are currently in that position, I would say like the best way to start is to ask people on your team or people above you for feedback. Start gathering your own feedback instead of, I wouldn't say go around and start giving feedback to everybody on your team.
Agreed. Not good.
That's not going to end well. But I think that it would be very, I think it would be received well if you say, hey, this is what Muhammad asks me every time we have a one-on-one is, what should I keep doing? What should I stop doing? And what should I start doing? And those are 3 really easy questions to ask like anyone during a one-on-one to find out how you're doing.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. And from my story, the example at the beginning, despite my fear and anxiety about sharing that feedback with Jeff, from the day that I started, he had already given me permission. If you need to let me know what I'm doing wrong. Like he welcomed that feedback from day one and really set an expectation or a culture around feedback that even though I had this fear inside of me, I already knew that it was welcomed. I already knew that he wanted it. And so his ability or his openness to receive it gave me space to learn how to give it well. And I think that's really valuable. In the culture of feedback, it's important to know you're not going to do it right the first time. And there's not a right or a wrong way. Starting is the right way, right? Just trying and attempting and assuming good intent of whoever that you're communicating with, knowing that you have the best for the other person. But I did want to touch a little bit about like how you can do that, if that's okay, because I think that really helps in the culture. since that time when I gave Jeff feedback, I've learned how to package it a little bit better. And one of the biggest realizations for me was that I was going in and saying, these are all the places that you're missing. This is what's not going well, as opposed to saying, this is what's happened now. So next time, this is how we can do it better together. And if you can kind of switch that communication style from this is what's wrong to this is how we can do better in the future, then it shows that you're really for the other person and you guys can walk in it. How do we do this together, right? How can I support you in this? How can we work on our communication? It leads to a lot more points of open communication as opposed to looking back and trying to correct something that you can't change anymore. So I think that's really helpful. And I've learned a lot in that area. It's made me more comfortable in giving feedback and receiving it for sure.
Yeah. And
That's really,
I'd say that when it comes to how we perceive feedback, we've talked about the different types of people in our organization. And, for me and Jeff, for instance, like we can wrap the feedback that we give each other. It doesn't have to be wrapped at all. It can just be like direct. It can just be like, here you go. Here's the feedback. Because Jeff knows me and I know him well enough to know what works and what resonates. But the way we approach feedback inside of our organization is that it's a gift, right? So if we believe that feedback actually creates a benefit to you because you're able to learn and grow, if you're using a growth mindset and you're like, thank you for that gift of feedback. But the problem is we wrap it in certain ways. And so if you're wrapping your feedback poorly when you're delivering it to someone, it's not going to be well received. But if you recognize that underneath that wrapping is the same gift of perspective, and that perspective is helping you become a better boss, a better leader, a better friend, a better mentor, a better colleague, then feedback isn't so scary, right? And so when it comes to feedback being a gift, we have to understand that different people will experience unwrapping the gift in different ways. So that means that we have to understand the people that we're presenting this feedback to. And even when people are giving us feedback, we also have to understand that when they're talking about it, when they're telling us something, try to have empathy for how they feel. Because if we've all talked about how afraid we are of giving people feedback, imagine how someone is feeling across from you when they're giving you that feedback. How would they like for you to respond, And so when you consider that, both sides of the equation, you recognize the value of feedback being a gift of perspective, then it starts to make more sense as to why it's so vital for a healthy and inclusive culture.
that's like our unofficial Softway motto, right? Feedback is a gift. And it's something that's so hard to practice because, again,
It is hard.
When you have to give feedback, it still feels like sometimes a gut punch when you get it. Sometimes it feels nerve-wracking when you have to give it. But yeah, I personally, it's been really life-changing for me to truly practice looking at feedback as a gift. If you really care about someone and want them, it's not just about, hey, I need justice. Like, I need you to know that you did wrong and you need to think about that and sit in a corner. I think for me, it's like, no, if I really want the people around me to improve and grow, I would want someone to tell me. Like, I don't want to be blindly going forward doing what I do, thinking I'm doing a great job. I need that perspective of growth. And I think that's such a compelling way to center our culture of feedback around.
And I think one other thing, Jeff, is, and I don't want to go on too much of a tangent because we could go on a whole podcast about this topic, but sometimes the benefit of feedback is honestly just getting it off your chest to this person. And I'm thinking specifically of that instance with Chris. Like, there was nothing he could have done to change what happened in the past. And just the fact of me being able to tell him, like, that hurt my feelings, helped us move on like that much quicker. Like, I was harboring that and I was feeling resentful and unforgiveness. And as soon as I was able to just say it and allow him to apologize, it's like, all right, cool. Like, I feel a million times better. Like, thanks for letting me get that off my chest. Because, I mean, some instances are different. Like, you actually have to work through something and do something tactically. But things like that, where something happened in the past and it just kind of rubbed you the wrong way or hurt your feelings, like, it's better to just say, hey, that hurt my feelings, because you will subconsciously or consciously hold on to that, and it will cause problems in the future.
Yeah,
I
think
that.
One of the biggest things I keep here in all of this is that relationships are key, right? So feedback is a tool that can be used to help develop and cultivate relationships and make them stronger. But if we're truly approaching one another in love and a perspective of I care about you and I'm for you, then feedback is the best way to go. That means you care about the person enough to be honest with them and open with them, that you can communicate that to them. Because like I said, Jeff and I, when I initially had this huge moment, we didn't have a strong relationship. We were getting to know one another. And I would say it accelerated our ability to relate and work together.
Yes.
Because we both made a choice. It wasn't just me stepping out and saying, look, I have feedback to give you. It was his willingness to respond and say, let's talk about it. And y'all, Jeff actually called me while I was on that vacation, and we talked for 2 hours, and we got to know one another, and we talked through the feedback and all of those things. And so it's cultivated a relationship for us that we wouldn't have had. And it has shown me that we have love for one another, right? That we care for one another as people, and we truly believe and desire that the other person can continue to grow and be better. And I think that can be the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think you're tying it perfectly back to love. I love what you're saying here. And obviously I reciprocate what you're saying about me personally. So I'm kind of blushing a little bit, but the reality is we're talking about business as well, right? So tying it back to love and business, getting what I need to get done from a work perspective is so easy with the three of you and many others here, because I know that if I screw up, I'll be called out on it and it's okay. And if any of you screw up, I can just get it out in the open and move on. And that love that you're talking about translates to, business outcomes every time. Like, we're not stuck in this kind of like either like a Maggie was saying, feelings, or getting stuck in those that stress of that. And we're not stuck in, not moving forward in progress, like in Frank's story, like a meeting stalling out. We're able to move past these things that I think a lot of other, it's very common for other people to have many, many stories of just where without feedback, actively being part of the culture, you're losing daylight, you're losing productive time, days, weeks, months of teams, doing the wrong things, not getting to the outcomes they're looking for. And so that's where I really wanted to tie that back to kind of why we're here talking about it, right? Love is a business strategy. To me, when I think of love, it's come in the form of feedback. And I'm thinking about this right now. Like, I'm thinking back to all the times I can really feel like I have a love for someone I work with. It can be traced back to these moments of feedback that we're able to give each other over time. So I think that one of the things that we should do, I'm sorry for the listeners out there, if you're finding an interest in like this topic and really wanting to look deeper, because feedback can be a very surface level topic as well. It can just be like, yeah, I'm guilty of it as a leader, saying I'm open to feedback. I just give it to me, but then actually practicing it is a very different thing. We actually will be holding Softway will be holding a interactive workshop on feedback on September 10th. And so it's not a webinar. It's not a one-sided thing. It's actually a very interactive. We're going to break into groups. I'll be there. Frank, the podcast hosts will be there. We're going to engage, and we're going to actually try and experiment with some ways to actually really open up about feedback. So I'm really excited about that. And we'll put in the show notes some details about that event for anyone interested. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining me today. It was a really, really heartwarming discussion. Frank, Maggie, Lydia, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about feedback today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
We post new episodes every Tuesday here at Love as a Business Strategy. If there's a topic that you'd like to cover, or anything you want to give us feedback on, by the way, we love it. Let us know at softway.com/labs, LAABS. And if you liked anything you heard today, please leave a review, leave us that feedback. Also subscribe on Apple and Spotify. It means a lot to us. And with that, I will sign off, and I will see you all next week. Bye.